My name is Claire Jantz, and I'm coming to you from the Center for Land Use and Sustainability at Shippensburg University. Shippensburg is actually a university located in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We're in south central Pennsylvania, just about 30 miles north of the Maryland state line. The Center for Land Use and Sustainability is housed in the Geography Earth Science Department, and we've been around for a few years now, looking at pretty broad-based issues in the Chesapeake Bay watershed and also in the Delaware watershed. Our expertise in the Delaware and the Chesapeake has been really focused on GIS and land cover information, and we know that there is kind of a data tsunami when it comes to land use and land cover information. And so I designed this session to kind of talk about all of the different data sets that are available for mapping and modeling land use and land cover. Just to give you a little bit of, oh wait a second, I want to try using this. This is very fancy. Okay. About the CLUS, again, we are a science-based center, and we are very interdisciplinary. We actually have one of our alums here in the audience, Carla Johns, who's now at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So we engage a lot of students, but we also have a lot of affiliated faculty that range from social work to history to biology to geology and geography. So that gives us a pretty broad expertise. Our strength is really in GIS and systems related to GIS and land use, but we, again, sort of run the whole gamut, and we're increasingly getting involved with drones. So I'll talk a little bit about using drones as well. Also, before I keep going, just to let you guys know, this whole presentation is available digitally on our website. So you can go to centerforlanduse.org and go to we have a section for presentations under our resources area, and you can check this out. Because if there's a website or something that I show that you really want to look at, I wanted to make sure that you guys have that at your fingertips later. So what we're going to be talking about today is, first of all, what is remote sensing and how you can use it, how it can be used, and how to deal with the data tsunami that is coming at us from space and from aircrafts and from other instruments. So I'll be going over some of the main programs, the products, the different types of resolution of the data, and also the uses. And I'll also be talking about how much what one of my friends up in the Pocono-Kittatinny cluster calls GIS Kung Fu, like how much GIS knowledge do you have to have, how much work does it take to get information out of these data sets. And so by the end of the presentation, we'll have looked at least this kind of different ways of looking at the landscape and how, and as well as some others. So just to get a sense from you guys, what is the GIS Kung Fu level in this room? Kung Fu level 1, I can use an online interactive map. So basically I can use the web, right? Okay, good. So level 2, I can use ArcGIS to view data, make maps, do some spatial analysis on a desktop. Okay, so about half are 1 and 2. Level 3, high-level spatial analyses using Python, R, or some other scripting language on a high-performance workstation. Any 3s out there? Okay, so 100% 1s and 2s, which is exactly what I was expecting, so that's good. So let's talk a little bit about, this is the outline that we'll be following today. What is remote sensing? We'll go over some remote sensing programs and products. And the last part of the presentation, we'll look at data sets that are looking forward and backward in time. So if you saw Nathan and Peter's presentation, they kind of set this up really nice, introducing some of the data sets that I'll be talking about as well. So if we look at what is remote sensing, remote sensing is obtaining information about objects from a distance. That's the simple definition of what remote sensing is. It can be deployed from ships, from planes, from satellites, and then we take the information and analyze it to tell it what it means. And so when we're talking about information, it's usually electromagnetic radiation, sound, heat, or light reflectance primarily, and then we analyze that to tell us what it means. So for example, if we are looking at a landscape like this, we can use an instrument like this that will tell us, in this case, it's telling us the temperature of that landscape. So that's our remote sensing instrument, gathering information about temperature and then basically applying a color ramp so that we can understand what we're looking at. Remote sensing is usually divided into two sections. There's two types. There's passive remote sensing, which is collecting information about natural energy that's emitted or reflected. And so our eyes and ears are passive remote sensing instruments, right? We listen, we gather sound, or we record information with our eyes about light that's being reflected from objects. And that same kind of concept applies to this example where we might be gathering information about how sunlight is reflected from forests from an aircraft, or about how sunlight is reflected from the Earth's surface from satellites. So that's passive remote sensing. And the way that we analyze that data is that different objects have different what we call reflectance signatures. So this helps us to distinguish between materials. So for example, out here in the shortwave infrared, we can really clearly distinguish between healthy vegetation and between soils and rocks. And so those distances between the lines on these reflectance signatures are places where we can split apart how different objects are characterized. I don't think there'll be a test on this, so. We also have active remote sensing, and this is when the instrument provides their own energy source. So the sensor emits radiation, and then the reflected radiation is detected and measured by the sensor. So hopefully none of you guys were encountering this type of active remote sensing, right? This is using, this is a radar detector, right? So they're shooting out waves towards your car, and the waves bounce back, and that is used to derive the speed that you're going. So that's an example of active remote sensing. From kind of looking at the another commonly used or familiar form of active remote sensing is sonar, where sound waves are bounced down to the surface and then measured distance coming back up to the ship helps you to map sea surface floors. And the analog to sonar in the kind of Earth's surface is light detection and ranging systems, LIDAR systems. And Nathan mentioned this in his talk, and we'll talk a little bit about data sets coming out from these types of systems. But at the moment, LIDAR systems are airborne deployed, which means that they're usually mounted on planes or drones. There is a plan to launch a spaceborne LIDAR system to get sort of more global coverage. But it works the same way as a sonar system, except instead of sound, it's using light pulses that are bounced down to the Earth and then reflected back up. And that helps us to be able to get information about the three-dimensional surface of the land. So that's a really brief introduction to these systems. A couple kind of pros and cons of these approaches. Passive remote sensors, again, are focused on naturally occurring energy. Active remote sensors have their own energy, so they can collect data at any time. That means that for passive remote sensing, clouds are a problem. nighttime is a problem, whereas active remote sensing can see through the clouds or can be used at nighttime. Passive remote sensing has been around for a really long time, and so most of the data products that I'll talk about today are from passive remote sensing instruments. They have very low power requirements and are widely available. So this is where a lot of our research and development has gone into over the past several decades, whereas because of the power requirements for active remote sensing, we really are limited right now to specialized systems with relatively limited availability. Okay, so we're going to move on to some of our remote sensing programs and products. And we're going to start out with one of my personal favorites, which is the Landsat program. And this is a artist rendering of the Landsat satellite. There has been a Landsat satellite orbiting the Earth and collecting information about the Earth since 1972. These types of global satellite systems in the U.S. are operated through NASA. And you can see the timeline for Landsat. Landsat 1 in 1972, and now we're at Landsat 8, which launched in February of 2013. Landsat 9 is scheduled, hopefully, to launch within the next couple of years. Landsat 5, you can see here, was in operation from 1984 to 2013. And Landsat 5 was really only designed to go for about 3 years. So it became the workhorse of the Landsat satellite program. So many data products that we use rely on Landsat 5 and increasingly sort of pulling in Landsat 7 and Landsat 8. Landsat 6 exploded before it reached orbit. So the Landsat satellites, right now we have 7 and 8 that are operational. They complete an orbit about every 99 minutes and about 14 full orbits each day. So what that means is that they cross every point on the Earth's surface about once every 16 days. And they alternated Landsat 7 and Landsat 8. So in actuality, we have a 7 scene and an 8 scene about once every 8 days. So about once a week, we have an image of the same place on the surface of the Earth. Now, that doesn't mean that those images are always usable. If there's cloud cover, for example, that creates problems. But nowadays, we have a relatively frequent acquisition for Landsat. The spatial resolution of Landsat, Nathan kept mentioning this 30-meter pixel size, and that's what the Landsat spatial resolution is. It's a 30-meter pixel, which is 900 square meters, or about a quarter of an acre. So this is kind of an aerial imagery, and this is the same imagery from a land cover map derived from Landsat, and so you can see the size of those pixels are about a quarter of an acre. So that's the resolution of Landsat. And Landsat is used for all kinds of applications. This is information I pulled from the Landsat mission website. The top 10 uses just for the latter part of 2017 goes from agriculture to land use change. We have a section for software development, monitoring climate, forest management, geology. So Landsat is used in a lot of different applications. And you'll see that there are a lot of products that the Landsat program produces for users, and users can also generate their own products if you are at a GIS Kung Fu level 3. One of the most commonly or most familiar products from Landsat is the National Land Cover dataset. So how many of you guys use NLCD? Right, so if you use NLCD or you read about NLCD, that is a product that is derived from Landsat and has been derived from Landsat. By classifying Landsat imagery, we have a consistent time series of comparable land cover maps that go back to 2001. Right now, we have 2001, 2006, 2011. 2016 is coming soon, any day. NASA and USGS say that this will be coming any day. This is the classification scheme. We have those developed classes that Nathan and Peter talked about, some different types of forest classes, shrub, scrub, grasslands, wetland classes as well, agricultural classes. So this has become, again, sort of a standardized expectation for land cover maps that come out of the Landsat program. And Landsat, or this National Land Cover data set, is now, again, sort of widely used for doing things like detecting land cover change. So this is an area just outside of Scranton in 2001. The reds, again, are developed. The greens are forest. There we go in 2011. And you can see quite a lot of change in that 10-year time period. This is what an aerial photo looks like. So you can see, I think in this case, some warehouse development happening along this transportation corridor. So, so that's the type of information that the National Land Cover data products provide us, which again is coming out of a Landsat program. So there's actually multiple products that come out of the land cover NLCD, which are pictured here. So it's not just land cover. They also have a percent impervious cover, percent forest cover, and also an assessment of change. So most people just use the land cover data, but there are a lot of other data products available.
Are you taking questions now or at the end of your
I think we can take questions as we go along. So do you have something that you want to ask?
Well, when the 2016 comes out for the application that I use it through, I don't see how difficult is it to be able to get both sets of data, the 2011 and the 16, so that you can see what the percentage change is?
Yeah, so my understanding is that the 2016 data will be compatible. So maybe I'll repeat her question. She was asking about how easily it will be to bring in the 2016 data to do comparisons of change from 2011.
So I'm coming from a really basic level. So I use it through Model My Watershed.
Oh, okay.
And I'd like to know, I don't know what they're going to import into that program, and whether I can see what the percentage changes between the two sets, or do I need to go through a different avenue to do that?
Right, so I don't know what, Model My Watershed is done by the guys at Stroud, and I'm sure that they're aware and are planning of, how they're going to be bringing in the 2016 data when it becomes available. I'm not sure exactly, but that's a process that happens at their end.
So it's at the level of the application, and there's no other easy avenue to go through.
Yeah, the USGS might be releasing some online tools that would help to visualize change at different scales. And we may be doing that also for the Delaware region when 2016 becomes available. So kind of from the GIS user, level 1 perspective, you're really kind of relying on other people to do that analysis and deliver it to you, but there's a lot of excitement for when 2016 comes out, so I'm sure that those analyses will be coming out shortly after it's available. To download and work with the NLCD data is not all that difficult. So if you're kind of at the GIS level 2, or you know somebody who's at level 2, then it's not that difficult to work with these data sets, because they're already kind of prepackaged and kind of ready for analysis. Yeah, good question. So level 2. Landsat also, NASA and the USGS also derive a lot of other ready-made products from Landsat. So one of the main sets of data sets that come out of Landsat are a whole bunch of different vegetation indices. So vegetation indices are measurements of vegetation looking at the relative density and health of vegetation. You can also, because Landsat gives us an image about once a week, you can also look at phenology. So when trees green up, when they go to sleep in the fall and winter, and you can also track that over time. So one of my colleagues down at University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science recently published a paper looking at the phenology of eastern forest, focused mostly in the Potomac watershed. But it's probably hard for you guys to see. But this blue line here, well, this is the day of the year. So January 1st is over here, December 31st is over here, and then this is the vegetation intensity. This is from pre-2000, the blue line, and from post-2000 is the green line. And essentially, what he's shown is that trees are greening up a little bit earlier in the springtime, and they have a higher intensity of greenness in the springtime, but then they're a little bit lower in the winter time, in the fall and the winter. And then they've also linked that to the nitrogen cycling and nitrogen availability. So these changes in phenology, have that we can now sort of use the Landsat record to study, have impacts on water quality, on wildlife, on all kinds of stuff. This is a GIS level 3 analysis, but these products can be used to do that type of work. So we have that phenology analysis based on the vegetation indices. NASA and USGS also generate moisture indices for drought monitoring, burn ratios for looking at fire severity, a burned area, what they call a dynamic surface water extent. This is something that can be used for looking at changes in lake levels, stream levels, and sea level rise. Also fractional snow covered area and surface temperature. So all of these are ready-made products that you can get from the USGS, bring them into a GIS, and do visualization or analysis with them. We good? I think I'm switching sensors here too. Or no, maybe I have, 2 to 3 is our GIS Kung Fu level on that one. So pros and cons of Landsat. We have a long observational record going theoretically all the way back to the 1970s, but further back in time you get the sparser the data and the harder it is to work with. A lot of freely available products, both the raw images as well as those derived products are freely available. We have the National Land Cover Database, which signifies a kind of a national investment both in the Landsat program as well as in generating that particular data set consistently over time. We do have some challenges working with Landsat. There are data gaps in the Landsat record that cause problems if you're trying to do a time series analysis. There's also sensor differences. So the Landsat 1 sensor is very different from the Landsat 8 sensor. So comparing them is, you have to do a lot of acrobatics to compare them. Advanced analysis, obviously you're going to need specialized skills, software, hardware. And then we also have this challenge with temporal and spatial resolution. There's a lot of folks who want finer resolution than 30 meters. And there's a lot of folks who want a more frequent acquisition of information. Here, I'm going to go on both sides of Landsat, but keep in mind that the finer you go in spatial resolution, the less frequent the temporal resolution, and vice versa. So if you want to go really fine scale, you'll lose on the temporal resolution. If you go coarser scale, you pick up better temporal resolution, but you lose out on the fine scale resolution. So that's the trade-off that we look at, that we deal with at this point in time. So if we go to fine spatial resolution, Nathan and Peter already talked a little bit about this high-resolution LIDAR-based land cover data, which is now available for the whole Delaware River watershed and the whole Chesapeake Bay watershed. So between those two adjacent watersheds, we have a big portion of the mid-Atlantic covered with this high-resolution data. You can see the land cover classes here don't match up exactly with the national land cover data. So people who are familiar with the land cover data from the NLCD will have to kind of adjust their thinking or think about how these two data sets can correspond with each other. As I said earlier, LIDAR allows you to do kind of a 3D analysis. And these data sets aren't in 3D, but they do have 3D information. So for example, particularly in the tree canopy classes, there's a class for tree canopy. There's a class for tree canopy over impervious, a class for tree canopy over roads, and a class for tree canopy over structures. So that's where the 3D information has been incorporated. If you're into urban forestry, that type of information is potentially really valuable. Also for developing better water quality models and runoff models, that type of information is really important. So that's really where we see the advances on top of the spatial resolution of this data. And again, Basin-wide data is currently available, so you can go online and download the entire Delaware River Basin. And we're working on getting the county clips up onto PASDA so that you can go to a specific county and just download one county at a time. Because this is a really, really big data set if you download the whole basin at one time. So when we look at pros and cons of the high resolution data, I put this at GIS Kung Fu level 2, and I'll explain why that is. There are a huge number of new applications that we can use this data for. So Nathan was talking about being able to see the tree planters outside of his office building. So having that level of information, we can do a lot with urban forestry that we couldn't do before. We can do a lot more with riparian buffer analysis that we couldn't do before. Looking at impervious surface in different ways and looking at the parcel level in terms of a composition of land cover classes on a particular land parcel. Remember, Landsat's only 1/4 of an acre. That's the finest piece of information you get from Landsat. So having this 1 meter data, you can get information about individual trees. However, these become really large data sets because they're high resolution, so they can be cumbersome. And this is only one snapshot in time. This data set represents more or less 2014, and none of the states, as far as we know, in the Delaware River Basin, and certainly at the national level, there's not a formulated, committed plan to regularly acquire and generate new high-resolution land cover on a regular, ongoing basis. So the LIDAR data that we have for the Delaware River Basin was essentially funded by the William Penn Foundation. So that's private money funding the generation of that product. Will William Penn fund another round in 5 years? Or will it be county by county? Or will the state step up? Or will the federal government step up? We don't know. So we have limited spatial coverage. And when I mean limited, I mean it's not nationwide, right? It's spotty throughout the nation and throughout the world. We do have it basin-wide for the Chesapeake and the Delaware, but it is expensive to acquire new LIDAR for future updates. So if we want to use these types of data sets for change detection moving forward, somebody's going to have to figure out how to fund that. Yes?
So saying expensive, I mean, is it more expensive than launching a satellite?
Well, no, it's not more expensive than launching a satellite, but the Landsat satellites, as an example, that was multi-million-dollar effort, but those satellites are constantly acquiring data. to get Landsat and air photo data, which is what these products are made from, you have to fly a plane that collects both the air photos and the LIDAR data, which is tens of thousands of dollars. And then to map the Delaware River Basin was about $500,000 to process all those data and create and generate these products. So that's the cost of generating that. So just the mapping was $500,000. Actually acquiring the data, the air photos and the LIDAR was another several $1 million investment. So there are LIDAR acquisitions that are happening, like the Sandy money that everybody refers to. That was federal FEMA money that went into acquiring new LIDAR data, but it was just for a few counties, you know. So it's sort of very piecemeal right now. But there is a federal program that's trying to coordinate the acquisition of these data sets and providing some funding for it, but it's not at the level of coordination that we see for global satellites. Yeah. Okay, so this is very high resolution data, one snapshot in time. At the other end of the spectrum, come on, we can go to a satellite like this. This is the MODIS satellite, the Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometer. This has been up in space since about 2000. And remember, Landsat is roughly weekly. MODIS is every 1 to 2 days. So we get a snapshot of the same spot on Earth just about every day from MODIS. But the finest resolution is 250 meter pixels. That's about 15.5 acres. So that's the trade-off in resolution, right? You get every single day, but at 15.5 acres, as opposed to weekly at 30 meters or once in a blue moon at 1 meter, right? MODIS is really cool, though. Oh, here's just a comparison. This is an air photo. This is the 1 meter data, 30 meter data, 250 meter data. So this is just looking at tree cover or tree cover intensity from MODIS. So you get a sense for the differences in resolution here between those, the 1 meter to the 250 meter. MODIS is really cool. This is a compilation of every single day going back to 2000, coming up to 2013 of vegetation intensity. So you see, you know, global seasonality, global phenology of the whole world using MODIS. So to make this map, you know, that's GIS Kung Fu level 3, because you're looking at terabytes of data that went into generating this animation. But I think it also illustrates kind of the what you can see, right? This is another pretty cool MODIS application. This is almost real-time fire data. So these dots right here represent fires that happened in the last 24 hours, in the last 48 hours, in the last 72 hours, or the past 7 days. So this is the type of information that you can get from MODIS. Anyway, you can, again, kind of get that almost real-time information about what's happening on the Earth's surface. And in this case, this is a GIS Kung Fu level 1, because it is an online map, and you can just go to this website and see where there's fires burning anywhere in the world. So pros and cons with MODIS. We have a pretty long observational record. It goes back to 2000, not as long as Landsat. Daily acquisitions or almost daily acquisitions, and it's all freely available data, both the raw images as well as the derived products. But with that temporal resolution, you get a lot of data that requires specialized skills, temporal frequency with a lot of data, and of course spatial resolution. So again, the trade-offs. So any questions about MODIS? Cool stuff though, right?
That's available through where?
Huh?
Where's that available? USGS?
Yeah. Actually, I don't want to go all the way back, but if you just Google MODIS, you'll find it, and the link is embedded in this presentation, which is available online. Yeah. So let's go on to drones real quick. This is a photo of us that was taken with a drone from our GIS director. And unlimited applications with drones. I was trying to think of like, well, let me give an example, and I was just Googling, and all this stuff comes up. So, so drones are now being used for all kinds of stuff. We are using them currently in a parking study, which is not all that sexy, but so this is an image of a parking lot that was taken Wednesday, November 29th, at this shopping center in South Central Pennsylvania. This is at kind of a heavy shopping season. This is getting into the holiday shopping season. And we're working with the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission to assess some of their parking lots. We're essentially going to have students going in to count the number of available spaces, even at peak shopping, to try to make the case to local municipalities to change their zoning ordinances for parking requirements. So this is not a very exciting project, like let's count the parking spaces, but the outcomes of it, we hope, will have positive benefits for water quality. So that's just one example for how we can use drones. And drones, custom mapping on demand. If we wanted to make an image of Black Friday, which we did have parking lot images from Black Friday, that's what we did, but very localized. So you can, capture exactly what and when you want to capture for unlimited applications. It does require specialized training, and for non-hobbyist uses, you do have to have a pilot's license, and you have to know all of the regulations, and you have to have all of the permits in place before you fly in operation. So I put that at GIS level 3 for actually operating the drone for non-hobbyist uses, right? Okay, so I think we finished the remote sensing programs and products. Any questions, comments about this before we move on to data sets looking forward and backwards?
I just have a question, and it's probably crazy, but we're studying a 15-acre county park, and in the middle of it is about an acre and a half of bamboo.
Uh-huh.
Could we outline using a drone, would the drone method be the best place
You
to
might
show
just
a
be
picture?
able to grab it from a high-resolution aerial photo. So just even using something like Google Maps or Google Earth, you could visualize that location and actually draw a polygon around it. Yeah. That would be a lot cheaper than drones. Drones would give you a much nicer image. So if you want to communicate to, have some nicer imagery for communication, then a drone might be the way to go. Yeah. Yeah.
Forgive me, I'm like lower than level 1.
That's
but,
okay.
With LIDAR, I was looking at some LIDAR images in the Schuylkill River Valley
Mhm.
recently. It's penetrating through foliage and through soil, right?
Well,
Or
it
to
gets
see
to
structures underneath, or-
ground. It gets to the ground, so not through the soil, but kind of at the surface. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
What's different? How is it doing that?
So when you're
Short answer.
Yeah. So when the airplane is flying above and the LIDAR is shooting the laser down, the laser, it's like a little dot, and so it shoots a bunch of those little laser beams down, And some of those laser beams hit canopy,
Mhm.
some of them hit mid-canopy, some of them hit the ground. And so that creates a point cloud, basically, of where each laser beam hits some object, and you can use your GIS level 3 Kung Fu skills to segment the image, to say, I want to look at the canopy, I want to look at the canopy structure, like the mid-canopy, low canopy, or I want to look at the ground. So that's how you do it. That's how, those Mayan ruins that they mapped recently, they were looking through the forest canopy for the laser points that hit the ground surface, and they're able to extract the ground surface from that point cloud.
Are they getting between the leaves of the canopy? Is
Yeah.
that how they're getting there?
Yep. Yep. It's just like sunlight. Some
Yeah.
sunlight hits the floor.
Okay,
I
great.
think I have one in the back.
Regarding the use of drones, I have a project looking at stormwater VMPs.
Mhm.
Can the hobbyist drone user, I don't use drones, but
Yeah.
I want to employ one. Is it feasible to gather some information? What's
So-
our limitation in terms of altitude with that, like 2,000 feet or?
I think for hobbyists, it's lower than that. It's more like 400 feet.
400
Yeah.
feet?
And I think that there are some, even on hobbyists, there's some limitations, like you're not supposed to fly over private property, that type of stuff. So, a hobbyist could fly it, but if you wanted to use that information, for a conservation application with a nonprofit, for example, that's where you can run into problems with the FAA, right?
But you have to verify that you're 400 feet or lower.
Yeah, so that's why if you're using it for commercial, including nonprofit uses, you have to fly with a certified pilot.
You have to log everything.
You have to log it. You have to alert all of the local airports, military bases. You log a flight plan, and you also have to have permission from the landowners that you're flying over. And so that's why working with a certified pilot, theoretically that's someone who will make sure that all the regulations are being met.
Yeah, the reason why I ask is that they're newly constructed, so I doubt they appear anywhere.
Oh, right, on any of these
Yeah.
other products, right. Yeah.
I want to piggyback on his question, and that is, I read just yesterday that the FAA is giving Google and GE and a bunch of other groups permit. FAA wants to stay out of it, and they're going to give Google and these groups permission to set up a drone flight plan, thing. So what I'm afraid of is that now, if you want to fly a drone, you got to go and get approval from Google, because they're going to be in charge of this whole. They're doing it for commerce. They
Right.
don't want the drones crashing into each other. But if they're going to be in charge of this drone thing,
Well, still the thing, so that's the land use regulations around drones. Now we have to zone not just in 2D, but in 3D. So we have to start, adopting zoning ordinances for where drones being used for commerce can fly and how they can fly and all that kind of stuff. But even still, everybody is supposed to file flight plans.
but see, at this point, what their FAA said, we want to keep our hands off. We're going to let Google and GE and these other groups set up the system and run it.
Right.
And I'm just curious as to whether or
What
not,
that means?
Yeah.
Yeah,
whether or
I have
not
no idea.
Even like the hobbyists, they're going to have to get permission to fly their drone in the backyard.
Yeah, we're going to have drones crash into each other up there, right? It's
But, of
so
course, but they're going to look out for their interests first.
right. So I would imagine that Google's going to say this is our airspace, and that if you're a hobbyist or if you're a commercial drone pilot, then you have to negotiate that airspace just like you would with any other type of airspace restriction. So this is the leading edge of mapping and all of the regulations that go along with that. It's like the Wild West right now with
It's just kind of
drones.
scary that
Yeah.
the FAA said, look, we don't want to deal with it, we're going to let commercial interest control it and set it up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we tried that with Landsat and it didn't work very well. Landsat 5 was not as successful as it could have been because of some of those issues until it was until it came back into federal control.
So you might have to file a flight plan with Google. Google says no.
Right. I hope that doesn't happen. I think that there'll be some kickback from engineering firms in particular, and from geospatial analysis, sectors. So we only have about 10 minutes left, so I want to keep going.
Are you going to get into your Delaware River
I
Basin
am,
data?
yes, that is next. So data sets for looking forward and backward in time. And I'm going to highlight a couple of things. The USGS has created a data set that goes way back in time, back to 1938. So looking far back in time with this data set, you can go back to 1938 up to 1992. This is at a 250 meter pixel resolution. And I have another online map. This is for the Kittatinny Ridge area in Pennsylvania. So this is centered on the city of Harrisburg and the Susquehanna. And what we're looking at here in gray, this is developed land. Green is forest cover. And what we're looking at in the bigger picture is forest cover and land cover from 1992. Inside the spyglass is land cover from 1940. So you can move the spyglass around and you can see, for example, places where in 1940 it was not very developed. By 1992, development had expanded significantly. So I hope you guys can see
But there's
that.
also water in 92 that isn't, you said within it is the older data?
Yeah.
So there's water now that isn't within the older data.
Yeah, so those might be farm ponds, lakes, little retention basins, those types of water bodies, yep. Also looking at forest, this is 1940 forest, and that's 2000 forest.
Okay.
So
Regrowth.
Nathan and Peter were talking about forest loss, which is definitely the current trend. But if we look over the longer time period, between 1940 up to 1990, you actually see an increase, especially between 1940 and 1960. So that's farmland abandonment and reforestation. And then you can start to see a little bit of a decline after 1960, which is capturing suburban development. So they were talking about suburbanization being, or residential development being the driver for forest loss today. But we probably, this is for the Delaware River Basin, we probably reached peak forest cover in the Delaware River Basin in 1950, 1960. And now we're in a decline. So that's really cool data set to sort of look at the longer term historical picture. These guys have also created forecasts that go all the way out to 2100. This is a nationwide forecast from 1992 out to 2100 across 4 different scenarios at the 250 meter pixel resolution. So this is kind of a national level forecast. And with these data sets, again, freely available nationwide product, this is probably our best available spatially explicit long-term, so pre-1970s view of land use and land cover. And when we're looking at the future, their model actually also deals with forest dynamics. So it deals with stand age, it deals with harvest and things like that. The other side is that it's 250 meter resolution. Historical data only represents forest land use. So when we're looking back in time, we're not taking into account the timber industry because timbering is a use and not a cover per se. So they kind of danced around that a little bit. The forecasts are derived from global scenarios. so they're not necessarily locally relevant. For the Delaware River Basin, we recently completed future land cover scenarios that go out to 2070. And we look at developed land cover classes from the National Land Cover data set. And just to show you guys what this looks like, we are, this is an online map that we developed to visualize these data sets. We're focused, this is Pottstown right here, so we're focused on Pottstown. This is 2011, and this is our forecast under baseline conditions to 2070. So you can see by kind of clicking between the tabs some of the differences. You can also click on individual catchments and get information about the urban land that was there in 2001, 2011, and then what the forecast is for 2030 and 2070. We have 3 different scenarios. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, they mentioned in the earlier talk that you were using, I thought, regional information like municipality ordinances, and can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, we used a lot of different baseline information to develop these models. We didn't incorporate municipal zoning because getting a consistent zoning data set for the whole Delaware River Basin digitally was not really feasible. But we did incorporate commuting patterns, commuting zones, so trying to figure out where the growth pressure was from jobs and employment centers and where future job and employment centers would be. We tried to take into account amenity drivers as well, because the middle and southern part of the basin are mostly, that's mostly driven by population and employment growth. The upper part of the basin is largely driven by second home development. So there are some counties in the upper basin where it's half of the housing stock is second homes. So it's kind of different. We tried to address different drivers in different ways. And we do have, I don't want to go into all the details. We have there is a lot of information about this. We actually have a little table downstairs. We have some information there that you can pick up. And all of the background information is up on our website as well. We also even have a little, like a YouTube webinar that kind of walks through how this data set was developed and how it can be used.
I just had a question along with that. So you have to use data that exists. But one thing I wondered about is, as the acceleration of global change occurs in the second half of this century, where there's a huge loss of residences along the coast, how that may affect Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so we didn't incorporate sea level rise, but we didn't quite get to the point where we can incorporate what we would call climate refugees. So people that are displaced and moving inland. That was a piece that we didn't have the time frame to try to address that. But that is something that we are thinking about.
You do think that's an issue?
Oh yeah, I mean, we saw that with Katrina. I mean, the displacement from New Orleans. I mean, so we have some historic events with Katrina and with Sandy that we can sort of use as analog events for trying to understand how those types of events influence residential choices and business choices and those kinds of drivers of change. So yeah. One other thing I want to point out for this data set is that we have, like I said, a baseline scenario. We also did a scenario that we call a corridors scenario, where we tried to simulate the effects of kind of broader expansion across the watershed, largely focused on transportation networks, and then what we call a center scenario that focuses on clustered sort of smart growth type of development. And I know I need to wrap up. So again, I have a lot of this material is online. This is looking at it more from sort of a GIS desktop perspective, where this is 2011, and then we move forward to 2030, and then forward to 2070. So for longer term conservation planning, you know, in this particular watershed, you might start to focus on these areas that might be getting some growth pressure in the next few decades. So these data sets are available to support the DRWI efforts in the basin and any other conservation efforts in the basin.
And that's all within sleuth.
Yeah, so that was the model that we used. One thing that we're working on now, and I'll close with this, is a lot of the questions, we raised a lot of questions when we were developing that model. And so we're now working on another project that's funded through the Delaware Watershed Research Fund that tries to address some of those questions, particularly questions centered around climate change. So again, keep an eye on our website, because over the next year or two, we're going to be diving deeper into, you know, how climate change and how land cover change affects forest ecosystems. That's really the focus of our work right now. And I will leave it there with our website at the bottom and contact information, and it's 11:15, so we have to close.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.